most headaches like that, you're only like a 15-minute YouTube video away from like learning the 20% knowledge that gets you 80% of the results.
Hey, I'm Andrea Olson. I've been leading worship and training worship leaders for nearly 20 years, and my mission is to support worship leaders just like you in volunteer-supported ministries because I know what it's like. I've been there. It's amazing, but you have a big job, and sometimes you might feel a little bit alone. But I'm here to remind you that you aren't. We'll cover spiritual and leadership growth, practical resources, and get encouragement from other worship leaders from all over the world. I truly want to see you lead from the overflow, not the overwhelm. So grab a cup of tea or coffee and join me. Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. Well, I'm excited to chat with a guest today that, I haven't chatted with in a long time. We actually met several years back on his podcast, but he is doing amazing things for the church, and I'm really excited to have you hear this conversation. So welcome with me, Jake Gosselin from Church Front. He's creator of Church Front. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrea. Really appreciate it. Really excited to jam on some of my favorite topics here around worship and production.
Yeah, me too. So for those who don't follow you on social media, who aren't familiar with Church Front, will you just tell everyone a little bit about you?
Yeah. My name's Jake. I'm based in Florida, and I'm also in Colorado for a good chunk of the year. The work we do is kind of all around the country, and I've been a worship leader and in production ministry really since high school. Now I'm like in my mid 30s. Got 4 kids.
Wow.
Got my wife Kaylee, and kind of in the thick of it. Family just keeps growing, and our business keeps growing a lot. So the Lord is gracious, giving me the ability to keep up with it one day at a time here. But it's awesome. Really love what I get to do. Church Front, I founded that back in 2016 and 17. I really, as a worship leader serving in a church, felt the kind of the frustration and pain of trying to navigate technology, especially because a lot of new tools have come out, especially over the last decade. It's exciting. A lot of these tools have become more accessible, more affordable for small to mid-sized churches, but it's still difficult navigating them, knowing how to make the most of them. And then a lot of us who are inheriting these church roles as worship leaders, we're inheriting church buildings that were built decades ago, prior to this technology, prior to modern music. And that's just something that, I mean, even to this day, because I'm working with like dozens of churches around the country at any given time, helping them navigate these decisions with church renovation projects, new build projects, even smaller upgrade projects. Our team is just constantly navigating these questions with worship leaders, with pastors. How do we go about building the right audio, visual, lighting, and broadcast infrastructure for our ministry? So Churchfront has kind of a media facet to it. We've got the YouTube channel where we're putting out free content all the time around worship and specifically production ministry. Everybody, let's face it, especially on YouTube, everybody geeks out about the technology videos that we make. Yes. So we definitely lean heavier into that. We do like to create like worship related content as well for just equipping worship leaders on weekly planning and leading. And then we have our education side of what we do in consulting, where people can work through our courses, they can talk to coaches, and we can actually have a lot more personalized training for people. And then the third piece is the install and integration process side of things, what we do, where we will get into the weeds, get boots on the ground at a church, create custom designs for their production systems, and then install them as well. So, a lot of people like, they kind of encounter us from a YouTube video, randomly searching something, and then next thing they know, they got a whole crew of us on site at their church for like a week straight for pulling 16-hour days, installing their system. So that's what we do.
That's amazing. Well, and I love the journey of like the different facets of your organization because all of it is so needed. And it does end with, like you said, like, well, actually, we do need a system and we do need help figuring out what to do and we need it installed. I was just chatting with somebody a couple of weeks ago, a family member. We were at a wedding and she's a secretary at their church. And she was like, we need somebody. Do you know anybody? And so it's such a huge need. I'm curious because I didn't know about the education component. I'm so glad you guys are doing that. That's so cool. Do you get a lot of worship leaders coming to you saying like, I know not enough. I need to know more. And is that kind of the people that are going through your courses?
Yeah, I would say the vast majority of the folks who sign up for our courses and eventually end up in our consulting program, they are worship leaders who they got hired maybe as a worship leader, maybe they're the lead volunteer worship leader, and they're also assumed to be the lead production leader at the church as well,
Yeah.
even though they didn't like sign up for it. It's like, oh, you're the worship leader. You're also supposed to understand how to run the sound console, how to make the mix sound good and consistent week to week, how to train all the volunteers, how to do all those things.
Yeah.
And we're like, wait, I thought I was like planning sets, leading a band and all that stuff. And that's really our team, myself. So we got myself, Luke Jackson, Adam Baronic, Matt Wolcher, Eric Johnson. Like that's the five of us who kind of make up the core team. And then we have some other part-time contractors, but all of us started in as worship leaders and worship pastors in what we do.
Okay.
We are, well, Eric he's kind of in his own league as a professional drummer, and he not necessarily was a full-time worship pastor, but but all the four of us, like, we know what it's like being in a small to mid-sized church, having to wear both hats. So that's why a lot of the people who do discover our content, they are worship leaders, and that's how they come across it.
That's amazing. I mean, I can't tell you how many worship leaders I've talked to that are like, yeah, I've had to take the iPad on stage with me because we didn't have a sound tech or and they're like, they have a Personas or whatever, and they're able to, do it from the iPad. So what would you say are some of the like core challenges or what are the first things that you address when a worship leader comes to you and is like, okay, I'm supposed to be the production head apparently, and I'm on stage. Like, where do I start? What are the first steps you take with them?
Yeah, I think that the easiest steps to take for anybody before, I feel there's two core areas that you can address with your production system if you're having problems with sound, lighting, broadcast. And one facet of it is the education and knowledge, and that's something people can always address much quicker than hey, let's go buy a bunch of new gear and install new systems, right? Like because the buy new gear, install new systems often comes with a hefty price tag that goes into tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of dollars to address some issues. And that's much bigger conversations that might take years for a church to be able to navigate through that transition, right? So the thing that's quicker, anybody can do today, very actionable, is literally just go onto the Churchfront YouTube channel, and we have so many videos on there and on our website, like just the free stuff. I need to organize. I was thinking about doing this on our website because we have so much content in an article, but it's like, hey, if you're struggling with the basics of audio, lighting, and video, here's like 3 videos that probably would take you less than an hour to work through. And like, this will save you hours and hours and hours and maybe even years of headache of just knowing the basic fundamentals of how to navigate a sound console, how to understand like what's good lighting, and then how to operate basic exposure on a camera. Like, most of these headaches, and I'm speaking from experience, most headaches like that, you're only like a 15-minute YouTube video away from like learning the 20% knowledge that gets you 80% of the results, right? It's not as complicated as it seems. I'm going through the same thing. I'm learning software called Vectorworks right now. It's like an architectural CAD software because as our projects get bigger, we have to have better drawings for them. And it's like, I'm going back through the same learning process where I've got Vectorworks open, I've got instructional videos from Vectorworks, I've got YouTube. And then now we got tools like GPT where it's like, you can be learning something, and then when I'm stuck, I just like ask Chat GPT. It's not like the best at everything yet, but it can
Right.
help you get unstuck on the little things. So all that said, I would address the knowledge portion of it first, because I have been in situations where churches have very inadequate audiovisual lighting systems, but by just it's actually kind of comical. A lot of times, our team members will arrive on site to a church, and we do like a 1-day kind of consult, an assessment. We take kind of a survey of what's going on, and we'll go to their mixing console and spend a few minutes kind of poking around, and then afterwards, like the band will play, and then the leaders are in there are like, oh my word, like what did you do? It sounds so much better. Same gear, same console, same speakers,
Yep.
same musicians. And then we're literally like, we just cleared all the settings on your console to like default mode again. Like it wasn't even like, it's not even like we're doing any magical thing half the time.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, like, but that's what happens is like churches, week after week, they have these like EQ adjustments and gain adjustments and compression adjustments that it's like putting a Band-Aid over a Band-Aid over a Band-Aid over a Band-Aid.
Yes.
And like you're overcomplicating it. And then it would sound better if you literally just like deleted all those settings and go back to like set good gain structure. And it's actually probably not going to sound that horrible. So, but those are the things where you have to take the time to learn the fundamentals of audio, lighting, camera operation. That's going to solve so much headache in these areas. So that's the first place. We can talk about like once you've done that, because there is kind of, you eventually hit a limit where, okay, I'm making the most of the gear in the situation that I have. And then churches have to decide, once that's kind of exhausted of the education side of things, because even I've been in situations where I'm like, okay, this is literally as good as I can make it. Like I've pulled all the tricks I can think of, and I've been doing this for a while, but like you hit a ceiling that is then you're limited by like, you probably need XYZ new system to bring you to that next tier of quality. And that's a whole other conversation. It's part of it too.
Before we get to the rest of today's episode with Jake Gosselin from Churchfront, I wanted to tell you about what's going on at Overflow Worship for the rest of 2024. Now, this year has been amazing, but what I'm about to tell you, what we're about to do, is going to be the best part of the entire year. I guarantee it. But here's the deal. You're not going to be able to see what we're doing if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel. So make sure that you head over to YouTube at Overflow Worship Official and subscribe, because we are releasing some brand new things. And guys, what we're doing is something we have never done before. And honestly, nobody else is doing this. And why? Why are we doing this? Because I believe that God has called us at Overflow Worship for the rest of 2024 to focus on worship, prayer, and joy. Why? Because worship and prayer are our foundation, right? It's just the thing that brings us life, the thing that refuels us and refills us, right? But joy is something that we all need, especially in the times that we're facing right now. Joy is something that we all need. And so we are focusing on worship, prayer, and joy. And the opportunities that we're bringing to you and the things that we're releasing are all surrounding that. And so we are releasing something brand new on Thanksgiving Day, but you're not going to be able to watch it if you don't subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So make sure that you head on over there to Overflow Worship Official, or if you want to just DM us the word Christmas 24, you can do that as well on Instagram, and we'll send you the link. We have partnered with Brian Tabor from Worship Probs. We've partnered with Praise Charts. We've also partnered with Ali Lundeen of Proverbs 31 Girl on Instagram, all in order to bring you something really special. And so I encourage you and challenge you to hop on over to YouTube, subscribe, and make sure that you don't miss what's coming, because it is going to be really fun, really incredible, and I pray that it is the biggest blessing to all of you. All right, let's get back to today's episode with Jake Gosselin from Churchfront. Well, I love that you started with education, because I think I couldn't agree more, but it's such an easy, I don't know. I think sometimes we get in the mindset of saying like, oh, it'd be easier just to buy new gear. Like, oh, I have a small budget. I could spend a couple $1,000s. I got that approved to get whatever little extra add-on thing. And it's like, that might not help you. It might just make it worse.
Yep.
And so often we think it's faster to just quick buy the thing when it's, if you, like you said, you take an hour and you watch these 3 videos and you get what you need. So, I mean, let's go to the next step for a little bit, because I do get questions from people and I always have to defer to a professional because I'm like, I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't know. But people will say, how do I know when it's time to make a change or upgrade the system, or, that we've exhausted it? Like, is it, because it's funny at our church, they want to get a new board, but the old board has to die. Apparently, I'm a volunteer. The old board has to die, apparently, and I'm like, that is interesting because it's going to die on Sunday morning during the live stream,
Yeah.
like 100%. You know
Yep.
what I mean? It's not going to die on a Monday morning.
Yep. Yep.
So like, what do you tell people as you're coaching them if you were to say like, no, you don't need anything, or yes, you do? What's the conversation like?
Yeah. So, what we'll do is often what's great is we get boots on the ground and we can like come to the actual church and like start surveying it in person. Cause there are, we can do a lot of stuff virtually, but when we actually get boots on the ground, it does take that to a whole new level. And I kind of divide up, I call it kind of the worship tech blueprint, when you're starting to assess like what's the priority if we want to move the needle here in quality. Like, how do we even prioritize what has to happen? Audio, I still think is the foundation of everything that happens production wise, because people in the room need to hear things clearly. They need to hear the sermon, the word of God clearly. They need to hear singers leading songs clearly, and the instruments clearly. And if you get a lot of foundational things right with audio, that ends up translating online a lot easier if it's done well in the room, right? And then lighting, I would say, is kind of the next big pillar, because then people, they need to see you next, whether it's in person, you need to be lit clearly on stage, and then that's going to play a huge role on how that's going to translate online with cameras. Like, don't go spending a ton of money on fancy cameras if you have horrible lighting in your space, because it's gonna be backwards way of doing it. So like just yesterday, I a church here in the Denver area had reached out, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. You're like 10 minutes from me. I don't need to, I'll just come by and walk your space real quick. And this is a very typical story where it's a church that it's like I think a 12-year-old church that they finally were able to buy a space, and it's an old Lutheran building, beautiful space, bunch of like a cool wall is like all stained glass. And then it's like, I was telling the pastor, I'm like, man, like this is nice, because I think architecturally and design wise, a lot of this stuff, it's cool again. And like, I would embrace the kind of the aesthetic of the space, and not try to, don't just like make it a black box or something like that. And when I walk in the space, when it comes to audio, one thing I'll do is just like a simple, and this is something anybody can do, is just go in the middle of the room, clap your hands, and then try to count like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. How long are you hearing the reverb of your clap bounce around the room? That can kind of give you a rough assessment of the reverb time. And if that reverb time is over 2 seconds, you have some acoustical challenges in that room that it's going to make it very hard to mix well in person and get that to translate online. So even before we start thinking about what speakers, mixing console, or any other gear we need to buy, we got to think architecturally about the space. Is it helping us or hurting us? You don't need to treat it perfectly like a studio. Like, you want it to still feel like a live room, which is why we say, ideally like 1.5, 2 seconds is a good amount. And then you can add in, reverb and stuff like that to your vocalists. And you can add space to your mix through the processing and effects, but it's better to start with a little bit less space in there, so you have more control over that. So that's one thing to consider, where like, a lot of churches will be like, oh, we need a new speaker system. And they think that's the best first step. But honestly, like at my church in Florida, was again an old Lutheran building built for choir and organ, so very, very reverberant. But the first thing we did, we're still using these old, not super old, but I don't know, 5-6-year-old JBL portable speakers that are very budget speakers, but it was a significant improvement to our sound when we added absorption panels to the walls of that room, so that now The audio is just like mostly coming from the speakers. It's very clear. We still have plenty of life in the room and reverb. I actually kind of want to add, I feel like we need to add a few more panels, but that significantly helped the level
Hmm.
of quality we could get out of even inferior PA speakers by treating the room first. So that's an area that just people don't often think about. And then it's like, okay,
Yeah.
consider the acoustic treatment of the room. And then I do think PA speakers themselves that are properly tuned and rigged and set up for your space to get good coverage around the room. That's another like foundational audio thing that like you kind of want to do right first, because if you get
Yeah.
that right, then the work done at the mixing console gets easier for volunteers to do. What's hard is a lot of churches have very inferior acoustics and speaker configurations that make it way harder to mix at the mixing console. It's like, yeah, you need
Yeah.
like a pro to be able to handle this situation. It's like that's why make your life easier by like setting the foundation right for all these systems. Then for the mixing console itself, it's like, yeah, for like a few $1,000 you have incredible mixing consoles these days.
Yeah.
Even the good old trusty X32, by
Yep.
Behringer, like that you can have a phenomenal sounding mix on that thing. So long as your room is configured properly, speakers are configured properly. It comes to a point though where it's appropriate to upgrade to a
Hmm.
nicer console if you want higher channel count, you want more processing power. There's consoles like from Waves. I like the Waves audio consoles now, where you can have all your plugins built into the console. You can have vocal
Hmm.
tuning and all that fun stuff, right? And it's kind of mind-boggling how good it can sound in this one console. So
Yeah.
get the foundation right, and the same thing with lighting. Have good front lighting on your platform. Have a few backlights to kind of give your people on stage a bit more dimension. Backlights, hair lights, kick lights, interchangeable words there. Uh, Before you worry about throwing a bunch of fancy moving lights and atmospheric lights
Yeah.
and things like that. Once you have solid lighting, then you actually have more options with cameras, even to go a little bit more budget friendly on cameras, because I would rather work with a $1,000 camera with amazing lighting than a $10,000 camera with horrible lighting, because it's just
Yes.
that it actually the the way the technologies come, it's like these smaller cameras with small sensors can actually look pretty great, even if you
Hmm.
so long as you have good lighting. So that's kind of how I navigate. It's like you have to. It's like building a house. You got to have a strong foundation
Yeah.
to build everything else on, and once you have the strong foundation, you can always like upgrade things in phases or change things. Because like another thing people don't think about, it's like, hey, when you're building the foundation of your AVL system at your church, you got to also think through some of the boring stuff, like where and how are we going to place all of our equipment racks? Like,
Yeah.
should we be putting all of our computers in our tech booth and then creating this like cluttered mess of cabling everywhere, where that stuff actually could live in an equipment rack, backstage or in a closet somewhere. And then we
Sure.
can like, you know, keep things as clean as possible. So if you look at we have a lot of tour videos of our setups on our channel. Like, we really try to keep that in mind, because I am just so tired of tech booths that become a cluttered mess all the time.
Yeah.
So now our tech booths are usually just a nice tabletop with a monitor, keyboard, mouse, a couple stream decks for control, and you look underneath the table and there's nothing there. It's just like
Hmm.
completely clean.
That's amazing. That would alleviate a lot of tension and stress, just that right there.
Yep.
But I would imagine, like, you talk about these building blocks and starting with the foundation. I would imagine that you could approach this the same way with an existing system. If a person's trying to figure out if their system is sufficient,
Yep.
like, hey, okay, start with your room treatment. Like, just take a listen and maybe restore the defaults on your board,
Yeah.
or even just like you said, step one, acoustic, step two, speakers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I would imagine you probably have that conversation with people as well to kind of test if what they have is enough.
Yep. Yeah. All the time. When we go on site, well, obviously, because it's not like everybody wants to start from a clean slate. it's kind of fun when we do the new build projects and they're like, yeah, we'll take all of our existing gear, we'll put this in like the future youth room or something like that, and then we'll start with a clean slate. That's always a fun project to do because you can take advantage of all the latest technology in all these areas. But yeah, if you want to retain existing parts of your system, that's something that we always help people navigate those questions of like what can we retain or yeah. And I think the rule of thumb is like I a lot of this gear out there, it's like once it's about 10 years old, I feel like that's where it's like it's either at risk of just failing you, kind of like you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about your old mixing console, or you're just missing out on a lot of newer technology that
Mm-hmm.
because things I think I mean, it's hard to say. I feel like digital mixing consoles um, changed and evolved rapidly from about 2010 to like 20, I don't know, 18 or 2020.
Yeah.
Now the changes and developments we're seeing feel a little bit more just incremental, like nothing super game changing or that you're missing out on. Video switching technology, that's actually getting pretty inexpensive pretty fast. So it's like if you bought a video switcher 5 years ago, there's probably a newer, better version of that that's probably like a third of the price now. And it's
Oh,
like
wow.
you probably would just want to consider it's just
Yeah.
different the way that the kind of deflationary technology works. It's kind of different across different categories of equipment there. We always kind of navigate these decisions with people and help them. It really it is comes down to a lot of like how do we allocate our capital and our budget in a way that's stewarding the funds well,
Yeah.
and you want to have a robust system, and there's so many pros and cons to the different ways to make those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this conversation is so helpful and so fascinating. I think our people are going to just want to run to your website. But I want to hit one more topic before we wrap up for the day, and that is kind of the in between of when the worship leader and or production leader has to talk to the board or the elder board or their pastor or the people in the church about a change, about an upgrade. And, maybe they're all for it, but a lot of times there's tension in that conversation and there's, like they don't understand why.
Hmm.
And so, how do you coach the beginning stages of that conversation when you talk with worship leaders?
Yeah, so I think with worship leaders, that's why the education side of it is so
Yeah.
important because I do feel like they themselves, as a worship leader or production leader, or whether you're staff or volunteer, the more you know, the easier it's going to be to explain those benefits to your leadership and also explain them in a way that they care about those benefits.
Hmm.
So, if you go to a leader and you say, hey, this new mixing console we want, it's going to have like 128 channels and 96 kilohertz sample rate, and it has all these mix buses or whatever. It's like they're just going to look at you and their eyes are going to glaze over, right? Where it's
Right.
like if you communicate to them in the benefits of like, hey, we're considering these audio upgrades because you know how like some of our older people in our congregation always complain about like it's too loud or it's too harsh or whatever, and like we're all tired of those complaints, and they're kind of right. It's because we have an inadequate system where the audio, the way it's being currently processed and amplified and distributed right now, we have just insufficient gear, and that's why they're hearing these harsh frequencies,
Hmm.
and some of it's like back to the acoustic treatment thing that's like in the speakers. That's where a lot of that stuff is solved. It's like there's actually well getting some new updated equipment and properly installing it and tuning it will really eliminate the complaints people have. So we're not like when people say, "Oh, it's too loud," we're not just like pulling our master mix down. It's actually we're solving the harsh frequencies that are getting through,
Right.
that can be kind of tuned out of our PA, and then we can actually still have it feel really full, but nobody's complaining that it's loud, right? So
Yeah.
that's a really common one with audio, right? So I think with all the different elements, it's like explaining to pastors and leaders in a way that they they're going to care because these are the same pain points they have that technology can solve, just don't use a bunch of technical jargon and such. So, which I think for most worship leaders listening to this, like even for you guys, like you don't care about like mix buses and sample rate and all these like fancy things, right? Which is fine. And let my team like watch our channel. Everything, whenever we do like tech tours and stuff, we also try to explain these practical benefits of each of the elements. So like honestly, spend a few days just watching through our videos, and like I think you'll get an idea of the practical way to speak or talk to your leadership about these upgrades.
Absolutely. Wow. That is so good. So helpful. Jake, thank you so much for being with us here today and for sharing your wisdom and really encouragement, because what you've done is you've broken it down in a way that is not intimidating. It's not stressful. It's like, oh, okay, this is realistic. It's attainable. I can do this. And so I just love what you're doing for the church and for worship leaders. So thank you so much for all that you pour into the church. It's a huge blessing.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thanks so much for having me. And appreciate your ministry as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, before we sign off, will you tell everybody where's the best way to find you guys, to get in touch? Because I'm sure they're going to want to know all the things we talked about today.
Yeah, churchfront.com, churchfront.com. And that's the easiest way to follow us see all of our social accounts, all those things. Google us. We're pretty easy to find.
Amazing. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Jake. And to everybody watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite platform, thanks for being here today. Until next time, keep on thriving.